So what I'd like to do tonight is just kind of give a brief overview, and I'm going to speak kind of more specifically from the Christian perspective. And I know there's people out here who have experiences of hell in other religions, and we'd love to hear from you later. And so I hope that we can kind of do the overview, but I think we get into our best time in the religion seminars when we get to do Q&A. So I'll just get into it, do the overview. But if you have questions along the way, especially if I throw out a term or a word that you're not familiar with, please raise your hand and we can, I'd like to make it less of a lecture and more of a conversation. So let's get into it. Now, the thing about hell that makes it so big is that every civilization has had their ideas of a hell of some sort, a realm of the dead. And most of what in Christianity we normally associate with hell had its antecedents in way back in the early ancient cultures of the Near Mideast. So the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Gilgamesh epic, obviously the Persians, the Egyptians. I mean, you could do a whole evening seminar on each position of hell for each of those civilizations and cultures. So obviously we don't have time for that. But a few it's going to be hard to hold your attention with yummy food coming through all the time. Hard to hold my attention. But one of the interesting things is that there's there are these motifs and images that are fairly common when it comes to hell in the ancient Near East that keep coming up again and again that we still associate kind of with popular images of hell and Christianity. Okay, so for example, a river, crossing a river of some sort. A bargeman or a barge or another kind of boat ferrying you across the river, gates and guardians of the gates to the entrance to the realm of the dead, some kind of an important tree, and then there's the descent motif, also called the harrowing of hell. Those of you anyone grew up in a church where you said creeds, like the Nicene Creed or the Apostles' Creed? Crucified, died, and was buried, he descended into hell. On the third day he rose again, he ascended to heaven, seated at the right hand of the Father, But that's called the harrowing of hell. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Now, some of the early ancient Near East civilizations had an after-death accounting for, bad stuff you did, but for other cultures, hell or Hades was just a realm of the dead. It wasn't a place of punishment, it's just where you went when you were dead. For example, the Egyptians didn't have it until the Egyptian Middle Kingdom, and then this notion arose that, there is some kind of after-death accounting. The early Greeks did not have it, but the Greeks after 5th century BC started to believe more and more that there would be some kind of after-death accounting. Here's a Zoroastrian, everyone kind of familiar, Zoroastrianism, a religion that came out of Persia. After the fall of Babylon, 539-ish BCE. And it's in that period that Zoroastrianism arises in Persia. The thing about Zoroastrianism, and I've only become more appreciative of this lately, how much Zoroastrianism impacted Christianity. And we'll get into that when we talk about the devil a little bit too, because the Zoroastrian, the Persian concept of devil really had a big impact on the Jews as well. But they had a dual, so Zoroaster took the Persian pantheon of gods and boiled it down to a good god and a bad god. A god of good and a god of evil, so there's a dualistic religion. Here's something from an ancient Zoroastrian manuscript you might find interesting. There will be a final cosmic battle between good and evil will be conquered forever. A savior named Soshans, born of a virgin impregnated with the seed of Zoroaster, will harrow hell. Penitent sinners will be forgiven. There will be a universal resurrection of the body, which will reunite the soul. Hell will be destroyed, burned clean by molten metal, and the kingdom of God on earth will begin. Sound familiar? Okay. Now, in all fairness, it's hard to tell. That's actually from a manuscript early in the Common Era, after Christianity already existed. So we don't know exactly who influenced who there, but what is absolutely clear is that there's so much cross-fertilization that was happening among all the religions back then. I mean, there's even theories that Buddhist missionaries got sent as far as the ancient Greek world way back when. So I think it's way more cross-fertilization than we might even know about. Another Zoroastrian import that's important for us to remember when we're talking about hell, and this is an import from Zoroastrianism that came through Mithraism, another, started in Persia, but the Greco-Roman world got into Mithraism. 7 deadly sins, that's where that came from. No, the 7 deadly sins are nowhere in the Bible. Can anyone name them right now?
Lust, greed, envy, pride, gluttony, sloth.
Well, you're throwing it out, yeah.
Republican platform.
Pride, envy, wrath, sloth, avarice, gluttony, lechery. Lechery. What's lechery? Tell your neighbor if they don't know. And you might like to know that that's in descending order from worst to least bad. So pride's the worst, lechery is not as bad. Still a deadly sin, still a mortal sin. So we can talk later about mortal sins and venial sins, but okay. Also, no, and this doesn't have so much to do with hell. But because of the 7 deadly sins, that's also where the mystic number 7 comes from. People attach this mystical, spiritual significance to number 7. That also is not biblical, because it wasn't 7 days of creation, it was 6 days of creation. So it wasn't 6 days of creation plus, it has to do with, this Zoroastrian concept that when you died, the dead soul ascended through the gates of Capricorn and passed through these different spheres representing the deadly sins, and then shedding the appropriate vice along the way. So that's
7 planets.
Yeah. Mithraism also gave us December 25th as God's birthday. The Cairo symbol, which I would have written if we had a functioning dry erase board. But it's a symbol you see all over Christian sanctuaries, even today, on liturgical vestments and paraments. It looks like a P and an X. It's the Cairo symbol. That actually came through Mithraism and then got adopted by the Christians. The habit of calling a priest father, and then a tonsure. You know what a tonsure is? A tonsure is when you go into the monastery and take monastic vows, and they shave the top of your head and leave that ring around it. The tonsure, that also apparently came from Mithraism as well. Now, and here we're still doing the ancient overview before we get into the Jewish Christian stuff. The first thoroughly graphic description of hell, thoroughly graphic, extreme description of hell that we have from ancient literature is Virgil's Aeneid. And that's important because it became hugely influential for later poets, especially Dante. Dante leans heavily on Virgil's description of hell. There's this complex system of rivers. We all heard of river Styx, but then there's these other tributaries that represent other things, and it bores me, so I didn't learn about it. Okay, now, the ancient Jews were kind of interesting because unlike other ancient Near East cultures, they had no relationship with the dead. They did not worship the dead, they did not talk with the dead, they did not sacrifice to the dead, they did not expect to be reunited with the dead. In fact, Jews even believed they didn't expect to have any kind of interaction with their God Yahweh after death. In the Hebrew scripture, when you die, where do you go? A place, a jail. Okay. Sheol. S-H-E-O-L. And this is just, and there's a lot of references to Sheol, especially in the Psalms. But this is, the Lord, this is Psalm 88, O Lord God of my salvation, when at night I cry out in your presence, let my prayer come before you, incline your ear to my cry, for my soul is full of troubles, and my life draws near to Sheol. I am counted among those who go down to the pit. I am like those who have no help, like the forsaken among the dead, like the slain that lie in the grave, like those whom you remember no more, for they are cut off from your hand. You have put me in the depths of the pit. The pit is Sheol. In the regions dark and deep, your wrath lies heavy upon me. That is not exactly, I know that my Redeemer lives, or Jesus Christ is risen today. That's a totally different view of what happens to you when you die. And that's pretty much the standard view in the Old Testament. Well, another place where Sheol gets mentioned is Isaiah 14. Well, I want to list up Isaiah 14 for a minute, too, because if you ask any evangelical in America today, even someone who's not like scripture savvy, because most people are not scripture savvy, but what they will tell you, this is what they've heard. What did they hear about the origins of the devil? He is what? A fallen angel. Okay, and they think this is based on the Bible. This is one of the things that just really did me in, was that realizing that, I mean, not that I think that reading the Bible is great, but if this is supposed to be the basis of your religion and nobody's reading it, okay, it's based on this passage, Isaiah chapter 14. This is first Isaiah, prophet of Judah, 8th century BCE. See, I'm getting better at that. I haven't slipped yet tonight.
Yes, he did.
Oh, crap. Oh, hell.
You can see it on the playback when we.
I'm trying. How you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of the dawn. Now, in the King James Version, I'm reading from the New Revised Standard Version, but the King James Version, which is the kind of foundational version for evangelical America, in that translation, it says, how you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer. Latin for light bearer. So this translation skips the Lucifer thing, but so literally it just means, son of the dawn, bearer of light, something like that. How you are cut down to the ground, you who laid the nations low. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. Okay? Now he's gonna, I'm giving you the evangelical version, then I'm going to tell you what it's really saying. Okay. Well, it says here, you said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. That means he rebelled against heaven. He was trying to usurp God's authority. I will sit on the mount of assembly on the heights of Zephron, and I will ascend to the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. I will make myself like God. But you are brought down to Sheol. There's that word again. You are brought down to the pit. And those who see you will stare at you and ponder over you. Is this the man who made the earth tremble, who shook the kingdoms? Now, okay, that's because the King James Version says Lucifer, they use a Latin term and not the literal translation of the Hebrew word. So it kind of became like a proper name. And then, jumping up centuries later and many hundreds of pages later in the New Testament, in Luke chapter 10, there's a story where Jesus has sent out the 70 of his disciples. You thought there were 12. 70 on like their first missionary journey ever, like their rookie, knocking on door missionary journey. And when they come back, Jesus is rejoicing over the success they had on the missionary journey. And he says, he opens up, he's commending them. He says, I saw Satan fall from heaven like lightning. And somehow, in the evangelical mind, this passage that I read to you from Isaiah, attached to that kind of out of context phrase that Jesus used, has created this belief that the devil was a fallen angel. But getting back to that Isaiah passage, when you look at the Isaiah passage, it doesn't say anything about the devil at all. And when the Old Testament wants to talk about the devil, they have a word in Hebrew to talk about the devil. It is Ha-Satan, which is where we get Satan, the accuser. What Isaiah is clearly talking about is the demise of the king of Babylon. And he is using imagery of the Babylonian hell from the Gilgamesh epic, which is really interesting. I mean, he knows his ancient Near East literature, and he's using Babylonian literature to criticize the king of Babylon, but it's it's actually a political commentary. It's not a metaphysical statement about the origins of the Prince of Darkness. Yes, Jen?
Is Lucifer, that name, mentioned anywhere else in the Bible?
I don't think so.
Really? So that's where Lucifer comes from?
Yep. Yeah, that's a lot of stuff in Christianity is like that, based on some little deal.
But I mean, that's a really big. I mean,
It became a big name. He's right up there. Great question. Yes, great question. So now, Jewish ideas about. Well, you remember they went into the Babylonians captured Jerusalem 586 BCE, and they go into exile. Persia conquers takes over the Babylonian Empire around 539-ish BCE, and they start coming home from exile. And so then, from 539 BCE to the arrival of Alexander the Great, 330-ish BCE, the Jews are under Persian rule, and it's a pretty benign rule. I mean, the Persians, send them back out of exile from Babylon. They help to refund fund the rebuilding of the temple, and they're allowed to practice their religion freely. And there's a lot of movement back and forth, and a lot of support from the Persian, government. And so there's a lot of intermingling of ideas. And it's during that time that we see hints of their attitudes about life after death beginning to change a little bit. Because up until that time, when you're dead, you're in Sheol. But there's nothing down there for anybody to get excited about. But then, you get like little tiny hints here and there in the Old Testament and some of the later stuff that their notions are changing a bit. Like in the book of Daniel, chapter 12. Now, Daniel, if you read it, you think it's talking about the time of the Babylonian domination, but it's really was written during the time of Greek rule, 125 BCE. And this is just one passage from... oh yeah, here it is. So this is a Jewish thinking about life after death around 125 BCE. But at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone who is found, written in the book. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. Okay, that is a sea change in the Jewish understanding of life. And this is for the first time ever in the Old Testament, they think, oh, there might be something else. Probably influenced by their contact with the Persians, because Zoroastrianism believed in a type of a resurrection. And so, there are probably several factors that came into play there. I forgot to mention Job. Because that's really where Hasatan, the Satan, the accuser, makes it. That's literally what Hasatan means, the accuser. And the crazy thing about Job, so I'm jumping back and forth, I'm sorry. I should have talked about Job before Daniel. I know you look confused. So Job is way before Daniel. Job probably one of the actually oldest books in the Old Testament. And of course the whole premise of the book of Job is God making a bet with the devil. And Southern Baptists aren't allowed to go to a casino?
Oh, they do though.
Oh, they do, right?
They do though.
A lot of good choices out of that, yeah. But what's interesting is if you look at Job, Satan is not like this force, this evil force opposed to God. He's like God's henchman. He's the guy who does God's dirty work. And he's sent by God on this mission to torment Job to test his faith. So the thing about Satan is that it's just the whole figure of Satan morphs all the way through the Bible. And Christians will claim that no, there's this constant figure of evil all throughout the Scripture, and absolutely not true. I mean, it's just it's right there in front of your face. he's constantly morphing and taking on different roles. So he wasn't such a bad guy back in the day. The other thing, you've heard of the Apocrypha? Those are what we call the intertestamental books. Some of those books are canonical for Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox, not canonical for Protestants, but they'll still read them. But the book of Maccabees, which tells the story of a Jewish revolt against the rule of the Greek Seleucids, because after Alexander died, he divided up his territory among his generals, and the Seleucid dynasty, the descendants of one of Alexander's generals, is ruling now the area we call Judea or Palestine. And there's Antiochus Epiphanes was a Seleucid ruler who really kind of tried to vigorously, forcibly import Greco-Roman civilization and try to eradicate, really try to kind of, let's get rid of this Jewish stuff and let's have a Greco-Roman culture. And he did things like sacrifice a pig in the temple, which was a little inflammatory apparently. And this led to a revolt, and a very successful revolt, but it was a very brutal and violent thing. There were a lot of Jewish martyrs in the revolt of the Maccabees, and so there were in the Maccabees there were these hints also of a belief that the martyrs would be vindicated, and that the righteous martyrs would be resurrected in a resurrection of the righteous. So you start to see more, even when within the Jewish world, the sense of there's going to be rewards for good people after death and recompense for bad people. Well, this is, I think we're okay for time, but this is one of the more interesting passages from Maccabees, and we also have it from other ancient sources, that when the Greek kings wanted to establish Greco-Roman, well, mainly Hellenic, I should say, Hellenic culture as like the standard culture, it became kind of hip and cool for young people to want to do Greek things, do things the Greek way, wear Greek clothing, be a Greek hipster. And then the traditional Jewish mom and dad didn't like it so much when the kids were doing the Greek stuff. And one of the, I'm just thinking about this in the context of like tattoos and piercings and stuff, but one of the things the young Jewish men were doing during the time of the Seleucid rule in order to fit in, and this is in the book of 1 Maccabees, but also we have it in non-scriptural sources as well, there was a trend to attempt to surgically reverse your circumcision. Yeah, before antiseptic and anesthesia and everything else like that. It's referenced in there. Now, why would they have to do that? I mean, normally you're just not hanging out all the time like that for everybody to see. So, why?
They met in the gymnasium.
They met at the gymnasium. Gymnos is the Greek word for naked. Go ahead, Andrew, I'm sorry.
Yeah, where they worked out naked.
Yeah, so the gym is literally a place where you run around naked. And so if you're working out at the gym doing the athletic contests in the buff, you wanted to look Greek. I can't imagine it looked really convincing. Yeah, right. Oh, it came that way. What else do we need to talk about? Oh, Jews in the time of Jesus. Okay, so by the time Jesus comes around, there's reference to factions within Judaism. I won't get into the Essenes tonight. They had some interesting concepts, kind of influenced by Platonic thought, Neoplatonic thought. But then Sadducees, you may have heard of, old school Jewish traditional view that there's nothing after death except going to Sheol. But then there's a group of the Pharisees who, according to the New Testament, did believe in some type of resurrection, but a resurrection of the righteous. And so there again, they believe in some kind of vindication of the righteous, some kind of punishment, a beginning of an afterlife. There is some talk that the word Pharisee may be a reference to Persian things as well. I don't know. New Testament claims that Paul was a Pharisee. Yeah, I gotta speed it up, I'm sorry. Okay, let's talk about Christianity. So, while other religions all over the world had a concept of a punishment after death and reward after death, it was really Christianity that perfected the doctrine of hell and took it to a new level. We really did hell like nobody else did. I mean, absolutely. Now, in the Bible, it's interesting though, here again, it's not the scriptural evidence. Okay, bear in mind, I don't really believe in scriptural evidence. I want you to understand that, okay? But even if you're in that frame of thinking, in that worldview, the scriptural evidence for hell is pretty flimsy. The earliest author of the New Testament, the earliest Christian writings we have come from a guy named who? Paul. The earliest Gospel is Mark, yes. Earliest Christian writings we have are Paul. Paul never once uses the word hell. In fact, Paul hints at several points towards a concept of universal salvation. Like, Jesus died for all people, so all people are going to make it to heaven eventually. When I was a Christian, I myself tended towards the universalists. I could never, ever buy the concept of a hell. I mean, it never made sense. Okay, but punishment, yeah, okay, punishment kind of makes sense, but eternal, I mean, punishment has a goal in mind. Like, it's restorative punishment, or it's rehabilitative, it's something that hopefully you're trying to alter behavior. But the concept of eternal punishment never, ever made sense to me, even as a believer, because it's like, well, you're just doing it forever? That seems pointless. So,
If you're trying to convince people to follow your rules.
If you're looking for logic, stay away from religion.
well, yeah, I'm a slow learner. So, anyway, so it's interesting that Paul does. Now, did Paul not mention it because he didn't believe in it? Or did Paul not mention hell because he was trying to start a new religion and it was too much of a downer? I mean, he was trying to do an upbeat message. Maybe he was trying to do the Osteen thing back then. Stay away from the bad stuff and just, you know. So, but Paul doesn't mention it. The Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the 4 books in the New Testament that are kind of the New Testament so-called biographies of Jesus, really, hell is mentioned once in the Gospel of Mark in chapter 9. Jesus said, if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. It's better to go into heaven blind than to enter hell with both eyes. Now, the word he uses for hell there is Gehenna. Gehenna. Gehenna is a reference to a smoldering garbage dump outside Jerusalem where they threw refuse, the bodies of criminals and the bodies of animals, and it was constantly smoldering, constantly burning. That was his metaphor for whatever nasty thing is going to happen to sinners after death. But only mentioned once in the entire Gospel of Mark. The word hell is not used at all in the Gospel of Luke. The word Hades appears one time, and if we have time we can talk about that. The concept isn't really there in the Gospel of John. The person who really hammers home the idea of hell is Matthew. And what Matthew does is he takes a lot of the parables of Jesus from the Gospel of Mark and he tacks on scary endings to the stories. So he felt like Mark didn't have quite enough punch. So let me see if I can find this one. Oh yeah, here's a good one. This is the end of the parable of the weeds. I won't read you the whole parable of the weeds, but in the Gospel of Mark, it's just the parable story, that's it. But this is the kind of ending that, well, now let me read it. This will explain it better. Okay, this is Jesus explaining the parable of the weeds. Then he left the crowds and went into the house, and his disciples approached him, saying, explain to us the parable of the weeds. He said, well, the one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, the good seed are the children of the kingdom, and the weeds are the children of the evil one. And the enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. Okay, that's all you get in Mark. But in Matthew, you get this. Just as the weeds are collected and burned up with fire, so will it be at the end of the age. the Son of Man will send his angels, and they will collect out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all evildoers, and they will throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And you get that a lot in Mark. And that is where we start getting the notion of flames in hell. And the I never really got the I've tried to gnash my teeth. I don't know. What is that? But that's so Matthew really hammers home the hell thing. And if we have time later, we might go back and look at some more of those passages. Okay, and then of course the other big source of hellfire in the New Testament is, of course, the book of Revelation. The book that I'm not. It's not Revelations. It's Revelation. And I want to tell you that so you can trip up your religious friends, because nobody says it right. Well, it's in Revelations. It's in Revelation. Okay? Just so you know, you're like, it'll scare them if they think you're,
That's awesome.
you know, more biblically.
It's like New Braunfels. Everyone says New Braunfels.
Yeah.
Just like that.
Or daylight savings.
Focus. Okay. Interesting too. Revelation barely made it into the New Testament. So, like, if you Revelation barely made it into the New Testament by the skin of its teeth. It made it in allegedly because they believe the author was John the disciple, because you had to have some kind of apostolic attribution for a book to make it into the New Testament. But John the disciple did not write the book of Revelation. Some hallucinogenic tripper on the island of Patmos named John's common name wrote the book. And so if you take out Revelation, other than Matthew, they're just saying a whole lot about hell in even in the New Testament. Although I do believe that the historic Jesus was an apocalyptic Jewish teacher who saw himself in the tradition of the Old Testament prophets, and he was a vengeful guy. Jesus was not the nice, cuddly, Jesus loves me, this I know guy that we learned about in Sunday school. Now, although the foundations of the Christian doctrine of hell were laid by the early church fathers, people like Augustine, people like Origen, hell really didn't start to blossom and come into its own until the Middle Ages. When I say the Middle Ages, it's that period of roughly 1,000 years from the fall of Rome to the beginning of the Renaissance. And that's where things just start to explode with hell. And this is where we're starting to get into some of the artwork. The medieval theologians really spent a lot of time studying and thinking about hell. They tried to calculate how big it was, the area of hell, how many demons it could hold, its location. Was it under the earth? Was it in the ether?
The fire marshal coming to hell?
Yeah, there's a fire marshal come down. If they had fire marshals, they would have thought about that. They talk a lot about hell. But also, an even bigger factor than the theologians in the medieval fascination of hell was the weekly sermon. Because the sermon was, there was a lot of, the sermon really developed during to a new level in the Middle Ages as a way to communicate with church-going people who were increasingly baffled by the Latin Mass. Like, it's like, what is this? Well, at least the sermon was in their language. Sermons became, especially like in villages and towns where there was no other form of entertainment, the weekly sermon was the entertainment. And people loved a good, fiery, descriptive hell sermon. They drew enthusiastic crowds, and then this is also the time when, let's see if I get into Gregory the Great. Yeah, let me do a little bit of Gregory the Great, and then we'll get into some artwork. Gregory the Great, Pope, around late 500s, early 600s, and he wrote a book called The Dialogues. And one of the things that Gregory the Great does in the Dialogues is he records a number of visions of hell that had been reported to him by people who had had near-death experiences. And it was fascinating going through some of these near-death experiences from the Middle Ages. It's like, what? Nobody's going down the tunnel and seeing the light, and they're not being welcomed by their aunts and uncles. I mean, none of the things that we hear about near-death experiences today. Apparently, near-death experiences were utterly different in the Middle Ages. And Gregory was fascinated by these, so he recorded some of that. This is one report from a soldier, from a vision of hell he had. He saw a bridge over a black, smoky river that had a filthy and intolerable smell. Across the river were pleasant meadows and shining mansions, one of gold. But only the sinless, like a priest the soldier saw, could pass over. Not all priests are bad. Okay. On this side of the bridge, a sadistic church steward, whom Gregory had actually known, was bound with iron chains in a most filthy place. And here also was poor Stephen, is a merchant from another story, who was laboring to cross the bridge. He slipped, and a terrible creature rose from the river to pull him down by the legs. At the same time, beautiful white beings pulled him up by the arms, and at this point the soldier returned to life. There are several of these near-death experiences of hell that Gregory the Great, he's the guy who gave us Gregorian chant, and these became very influential. People ate them up, and a whole genre of medieval hell literature arose. And I want to read one more of these because this is an example of one of the most popular examples of medieval hell literature. It's called The Vision of Tundle, written by an Irish monk in 1149. Now here is his description of Lucifer. Blacker than a crow and shaped like a man, except that he had a beak and a spiky tail. And we need to help you understand maybe how like the common idea of Satan maybe kind of evolved and developed. And a lot of it has to do with these very creative authors of the medieval hell literature. Okay, blacker than a crow, shaped like a man, except that it had a beak and spiky tail and thousands of hands, each of which had 20 fingers, with fingernails longer than a knight's lance, with feet and toenails much the same, all of them squeezing unhappy souls. He lay bound with chains on an iron gridiron above the bed of fiery coals. Around him were a great throng of demons, and whenever he exhaled, he ejected the squeezed unhappy souls toward the into hell's torment, and when he inhaled, he sucked them back in to chew them up again. Yeah. But you know, is that any different than like vampire books? You know, I mean, this is medieval entertainment. I mean, they ate it up. They loved the gore. I mean, and so I brought along just a few pictures of examples of medieval images of hell. And here you can see he kind of sort of looks like the image I just read to you from the Vision of Tundle. Very black. I didn't realize that Lucifer was supposed to be, I mean, I always assumed he was being red. But in a lot of these medieval pictures, he's portrayed as being black. And then we'll put this one back up later so you can come look at it more closely. This is a fun one because there are 7 cauldrons here representing 7 deadly sins. And you can see there's gluttony right there. They're gathered around the table. Are they eating? Looks like they're being restrained from eating. They have delicious food set before them, and the demons are pulling their hair back. Yeah. Lecturing may be the hot tub scene here. I'm not kidding.
If I'm in a hot tub, does that make me a lecturer?
That's sloth. They're all lazy. You can come up and look at it later. It's great. That one's clearly anger. Could you hit the next one for me, please? Let's see what else we got.
Spacebar.
Oh, there we go. There we got another black Lucifer. Now, this is clearly from painted on a church. Yeah, very vivid. He's eating some. Oh, he's got somebody in his mouth. Those are legs dangling. Yeah. Could you hit the next one? Yeah, that's no. I like it. He's always spewing somebody out. No. Same type of deal. Now he's not. Black.
Like snakes coming out of his legs.
Snakes.
Coming
Yeah.
out of his ears, I think.
Well, and his knees.
All kinds of demon helpers there. Anyway, good times. But you know, you go. I mean, I'm sure some of you guys have been to places in the world where you go to churches and you see stuff like this, and you would go every week for mass, and this is what you look at, and this is your image of reality, you know. And it's certainly your image of God and how things function up there. Now, in addition to, so you have the artwork, and that's the function of stained glass windows and statuary and all that too. It's just you're living in a time when people are really illiterate, and so how do you teach them about the faith? You illustrate it for them. Medieval mystery plays further popularized hell. Oh, you know why Shakespeare never did a play surrounding the concept of heaven or hell? Because religious plays were banned in Elizabethan England. Because the morality, they used to have these medieval morality plays, and apparently things just got really rowdy and raucous and out of hand and chaotic, and people loved them. There were these great big spectacles. And the medieval morality, there was always a hell portion to the medieval mystery play. And these were acted out in local towns and villages and cities all over Europe. And the hell part of the mystery play generally involved lots of special effects, like smoke, chains, kettle drums, and then a device called the Jaws of Hell. And I wish I had found a picture. They're out there, but it was like every town had to have the Jaws of Hell, and it was a prop of a beast's head made out of wood, paper mache, fabric, and glitter set over a trap door. Wide jaws hinged and operated with winches and cables so they could make the jaws open and close, and when the jaws opened, smoke and flames and bad smells and plenty of noise would emerge to the delight of the audience. Could you hit the next slide, please? So this is not a medieval morality play, but it's the closest thing I could find. Did anyone recognize that? Oberammergau? Oberammergau, a city in Bavaria. It is an absolutely gorgeous town. I have not been to the Passion Play, but I've been to Oberammergau. But every 10 years, and they've been doing this since like, let me see, 1634. Every 10 years since 1634, the town of Oberammergau has been putting on a cycle of the Passion Play. Not exactly a medieval mystery play, because they've edited the text so much over the years, it doesn't even really resemble now in terms of the context of the script, the content of the script, what they did back in the day. But this was still the idea. These are the people in the town make up the cast. 124 speaking parts, and it takes 8 hours to complete the whole cycle. And if you want to go to the next one, it's probably too late, because tickets are probably already sold out. Yeah, or you can get them and they'd be like way, way expensive. People from all over the world still go to the Passion Play. I still think it's a little weird to be going to Germany to see a story about Jews killing Jesus. It's, okay. Okay, another medieval development in the hell theory that should be mentioned, and maybe we'll come back to it. What time is it now, guys? What are we doing?
Everybody's playing phone.
Okay, I want to have time for Q&A, so would be the doctrine of Purgatory. Could we hit our next one, please? Purgatory, well, that's not the next. I don't have time to talk about that one. We'll come back to it later. Maybe you can go to the next one. I'm sorry. There's Purgatory. And then we have another Purgatory one. Where's Waldo? Now this one is actually Hell, Purgatory, Paradise.
Tomorrow?
Yeah. Purgatory, I think, actually 1253 comment here on, was a act of marketing genius. Because what did Purgatory allow them to do? Okay, the thing about hell's a real bummer, but once you're in hell, you're in hell and you ain't getting out. So, what's the genius behind Purgatory?
Find your way out.
Yeah, you can earn your way out. And you can, I still have Catholic friends who joke about doing burn time. Apparently that's the internal Catholic terminology for going to Purgatory. Purgatory is still, I did bring along my copy of the Catholic Catechism, in case you want to look at that later. It's still part of the doctrine, actually, that the notion that when you die, nobody's perfect enough to go to heaven, so you got to kind of burn off your sins before you get there. But the beauty of it was, of course, that they could then sell indulgences, because you could pay money to the church that would allow the church then to take off time in purgatory for your dead relatives or for yourself. If you gave enough to the church, you could get like a total get out of jail free card. This is how St. Peter's Basilica was built, which we see in the news all the time. That building was funded by indulgences. Anybody have a question back there?
What you said, it started talking only about, really around 800, something like that. Was the discovery of creation of, or what do you like, of purgatory contemporaneous with that, so that they would use hell to market purgatory?
Oh, did they use hell to market purgatory?
Or dispensations, or what they call it?
Oh, indulgences?
Yes.
They definitely use purgatory was the biggest marketing tool for indulgences ever.
Yeah, but that doesn't exist in the Bible, does it?
Yeah, not really. The Baptists would say not, the Catholic would say it does. Okay, so how is it that this gets back into this point that Jenny raised earlier about, these obscure passages in the Bible that all of a sudden become the basis of entire doctrines? How is it that an earthly institution could affect the length of sentences in purgatory, that an earthly institution could declare somebody who's already in heaven to be a saint, thereby giving somebody in heaven more powers than they ever had before? They got promoted in heaven by something that people did on earth. How on earth would that happen? There's one verse. When Jesus says to Peter, I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. That one passage is the basis for the theory behind the merits of the saints, being able to name saints, being able to take off time in purgatory, that one line that probably was never, ever spoken, ever. Lewis?
In Shakespeare, there's a line that refers to purgatory. When Hamlet's father's ghost says, I am thy father's spirit, for a certain term confined to fast and fire, for a certain term to walk the night, and for the day can fast and fires, till the foul crime none of my days of nature are burnt and purged away.
Wow. Nice quote. Could you hit the next one? Okay, let's move on quickly to the Reformation. Martin Luther. Things with hell. We often get this notion that the Reformation was kind of this watershed moment of, kind of maybe Christianity making some steps towards at least leaving away some of the medieval superstitions and all that. In fact, Kurt asked me if I would some evening do a Reformation night, which I would love to do. We'll do that sometime. There's so much to talk about there. Martin Luther, of course, the great German reformer, thoroughly believed in the devil and a literal hell. He himself believed that he was constantly being plagued by demons, which manifested their work in his lifelong bouts with flatulence and constipation, which he talked about incessantly. And I kid you not, if you go to the Wartburg Castle in the Thuringian Mountains, where Martin Luther spent a year in exile after the Diet of Worms in 1517, where he, died of Worms in 1521, I'm sorry. See, you're about to correct me. So he was in protective custody in a castle way up in the mountains, and he had to study this room. He's under the disguise of a knight. He took on a different name. He took on an alias, grew a beard, and all this. And he worked by himself, producing the first German vernacular translation of the Bible that had ever been produced, and he did it entirely on his own. And actually, that Bible became the linguistic basis for modern High German. I mean, it is still, when you go to church in Germany today, a Protestant church, you're going to read Luther's Bible. But he kind of went nutso up there in the mountains, in the castle, and he constantly thought he was being plagued by demons. And there is a famous spot on the wall in his study where he allegedly, and he talks about the incident where he picked up the ink pot that he was writing with and hurled it at the wall. He was throwing it at Satan, or a demon that was, and so there's like this ink thing on the wall, so you can still see that today. So he believed in demons and the devil. Let's go to John Calvin. I was going to say more, but I got to kind of jump ahead. Okay, John Calvin, the next great reformer. And the reason I want to mention Calvin is that Calvin had way more influence than Luther did on life in the United States. Calvin like a less friendly version of Luther. And among the other lovely doctrines that John Calvin bequeathed humanity was the doctrine of prelapsarian double predestination. Prelapsarian means before the fall. You know predestination, everything's fixed. Basically the concept that he taught was before the world even began, God had already decided who was going to heaven, who was going to hell, and there's nothing you can do about it whatsoever. All the Puritans who came to America believed that. So, and this is where Calvin's influence in America, okay, blue laws today. The fact that we cannot buy wine in Texas before noon on Sunday mornings is due to this guy. I mean, it goes back.
What a jerk!
Yeah. All right. Blue laws. Because blue laws are a Calvinist concept, they were not a Lutheran concept. What was the? Yeah, and Luther would have been way in favor of drinking at any hour. So he would
But then we all have ink stains on our wall.
yeah. Well, there was also a theory that they think it wasn't the ink pot, but rather the chamber pot that he threw at the devil. Which is probably true, because everything you're told about Luther make it like 2 to 3 times raunchier than the way it was told you, and it's probably the way it was. But anyway, the other thing, so with Calvin,
You mean we had political correctness back then too?
oh yeah, oh absolutely. Actually more political correctness now. People today have to feel like, I think more politically correct now, and there's people today feel like they have to pretty up the stuff that people in the past said. It was, yeah.
Were Calvinists in Europe considered wacky during the time, and they allowed them to come to America just to kind of get the headache out of their...
Okay.
Huh? Is there a tornado coming? Okay.
Looking for a small child.
Were they censored?
Okay, it depends on where you were. Did you hear Tom's question? Were Calvinists considered wacky? The separatists, and they were sent away from the Church of England because they were anti-Church of England. But then the Calvinists became the dominant religious force in Scotland. So it depended upon where you were. They became the dominant Protestant voice in the Netherlands, in Switzerland. So it really depended upon where you were. But in England, you had the conflict with the Church of England, and that's ultimately what sent them over here. They didn't come here for religious freedom. They came here so they could establish their theocracy the way they wanted to. There's so many ways. We should maybe save that for the Reformation thing. Because we're talking about hell. I was going to tell you about some of the ways. Let's stick with hell, and we'll do the Reformation thing another night. Because there's like a bazillion ways. I mean, right now, I could give you half a dozen ways. Something about our common everyday life in the United States that is tied directly to the theology of John Calvin, and we still deal with it every day. But that's kind of a digression. If we have time later, we can get to it during Q&A. suffice it to say, big fan of hell, and he kept it going. Well, one way that Calvinist hell theology did impact us was the next picture, I think. There. Jonathan Edwards, American preacher in the early 1700s. His most famous sermon was "Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God."
Yes.
The
most psychotic thing ever written by an American.
I agree.
In my opinion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But it's worth reading. It was in my high school American literature textbook. We had to read it. You had to read it in school? Yeah. Famous image. Well, no. He was one of the two great in terms of influential preachers during the time of the Great Awakening. In the Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God was first printed, published by him in 1741. America was undergoing the Great Awakening, this massive revival sweeping through the colonies, and they were being whipped up into this religious evangelical frenzy with a lot of hellfire brimstone preaching. And the most famous image from Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God was this image he uses of the sinners being dangled by the hand of God, and they're like on spider threads dangling over a flame, waiting for the flame to singe through the thread so that the sinners would drop into the cauldrons of hell. I think we have a picture of that. Okay, here we have this skeleton like a spider, and you have the sinners being dangled on these strings, and then over the pit of hell. So Jonathan Edwards, George Whitefield was another influential preacher, and I think this was significant because this kind of preaching, these kind of images, really whipped up a frenzy in colonial America, and I think it made the founding fathers leery of. I think it may have been a factor in why they, consciously did not mention the name of God in the Constitution, because they had seen during the Great Awakening what kind of craziness religion can do to people. Let me just jump ahead. Hell, not as popular anymore as it once was, but it's still around. It still influences us. Who is the great blues musician, guitar guy? Robert Johnson. Sold his soul to the devil at the crossroads. And oh brother, where art thou? Right? But it's that's just another retelling of the Faustus myth. It's a reworking of these themes that have been with us forever. They're still popping up in popular culture. Meatloaf, bat out of hell. I think I have another. Could you give us another picture? My favorite album cover of all time. Satan is Real by the Luven Brothers. Yeah. Apparently one of them actually got burned in the production of that picture. There's the real flames there. Anyone know what year Satan is Real came out?
50s.
In the 50s, yeah. The Luven Brothers are amazing. They're not, like every album they did was not a religious album. But, I mean, it's all still with us. When I was a liberal Protestant my entire life, until last year. And even then, as I told you before, I tended towards the universalists. I told them I could never ever buy into the hell thing. Even in liberal Protestant congregations, when I gave the occasional sermon suggesting that, well, nobody's going to hell, I would always get hate mail that week for suggesting that in a liberal congregation. So people still like, I left out this wonderful concept. Yeah, well, yeah, as long as it's not them. A majority of Americans believe in hell. Only 4% think that they themselves are actually going there. The ancient church had this lovely concept called, that's got referred to as the abominable fancy, which was, there was really a belief that one of the joys of heaven was going to be relishing and observing the torments of the damned. And that was part of That was going to be part of the reward of heaven.
Deal around me.
Yeah. It is sick, but it was a real thing, and it was acknowledged. And I still can't help but think that that might be somewhere in the human psyche, you know. Questions? Vic?
Yeah, you hinted at this a little bit in your talk, but can you expand a little bit on kind of your take on some of the more liberal conceptions of hell, even within Christianity? For example, the idea that hell is not referring to a physical place, but it's referring to annihilation or separation from God. Or you also have the version that says that hell is not infinite, that it's temporary, it's rehabilitative. You can earn your way back into heaven, things like that. So, how biblically justified do you think those versions of hell are?
Well, I don't think there is any unified biblical perspective on hell anyway. I think you have the Matthew version, and you have the non-existent Paul version, and then you have the over-the-top special effects version of the book of Revelation. So I'm not even sure you can say there's a coherent biblical perspective on hell. So whatever, what Christian theologians always do is find a Bible passage that supports whatever idea you're trying to, put out there. But you're absolutely right that, especially after the Enlightenment, hell started to fall, hell became less popular, and then you had the rise of movements like the Unitarians and other groups that were gentler, and there have been a lot of modern theologians that have really tried to kind of explain hell away. Even C.S. Lewis, who we think of as he's the the favorite. All the evangelicals love C.S. Lewis, but in his book, The Great Divorce, I believe it was, which is about the heaven and hell, he has this image of a bus stop in front of the gates of hell, and a bus comes by every morning and opens its doors and closes its doors and moves on. The point being that the people who are in hell are in there because of their own volition, not wanting to have a relationship with God for whatever reason. And so I think some have said, but for whatever mysterious reason, some people absolutely utterly reject God's love, and because love cannot be forced on somebody, love has to be freely given. And so there's a reason why so they've tried to find all different types of ways to like you said, some have explained it as a temporary deal, kind of like an extended purgatory, so it's out there. I don't think any of it could be, grounded in the Bible. The idea of, this is Catechism of the Catholic Church. We cannot be united with God unless we freely choose to love Him. But we cannot love God if we sin gravely against Him. That's it. Yeah, like God loves you. I never understood this. I would really like to forgive you, but I can't, so, anyway, so I'm going to kill my son who's really needy, and anyway. Okay, our Lord warns us, this is the most recent edition of the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Our Lord warns us that we shall be separated from Him if we fail to meet the serious needs of the poor and the little ones who are His brethren. To die in mortal sin without repenting and accepting God's merciful love means remaining separated from Him forever by our own free choice. This state of definitive self-exclusion from communion with God and the blessed is called hell. It goes on, but that's the modern Catholic take on the topic. But yes, a lot of theologians have tried to explain it away. Yeah. I could use a beer. Anybody? Oh, you got one? Okay. All right. Who got a hand up over here? Oh, Jen? Jen? Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So, sorry. What is the belief now in modern Judaism about hell? Is there any, or, do they still believe in shales?
Oh. Modern Judaism about hell?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do they still believe in shales?
Reformed, okay, here again, you got different branches. main branches are Reform, Conservative, Orthodox. But then even within Orthodoxy, you have all these different interesting sects going on, some of whom are taking over entire sections of Brooklyn now through high birth rates. And I have a college classmate who's a female Reform rabbi. They have no doctrine whatsoever, no official position whatsoever on what happens after you die.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, yeah.
I just didn't know if they still, so I guess I'm still unclear what the shale was that you mentioned.
Yeah.
that was new to me too.
Right.
What about Muslims?
Muslims, do we have anyone here with, Johnny's not here tonight. Anyone here that could talk from the Muslim perspective? I can give kind of a half-assed answer. Muslim?
Johnny, I thought you were talking about Johnny.
No, Johnny Ali Risby's not. And anyone else from Muslim?
If you could wait until Lila gets back, I know.
Oh yeah, Lila could do it. Yeah. Can we hold on that then until Lila gets back? Yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, I can give you what I know from what I've read, but I'd rather have, good. Jamie, did you? Oh, back.
Well, I can add something about Hinduism, like the hell and heaven concept, I guess, it's been there since the dawn of civilization, it's thinking, right? But the hell, you don't stay in hell forever.
Okay.
It's like everybody who is dead, right? First they go to hell and they go to heaven. Based on how many sins you've committed, right? Like, you would spend a you would, there's a person, his name is Chitragupta, he's the guy who reads the history of how many sins you have committed, right? And he will punish you for those things. Once you're done with that, then you move on. So it's not necessarily like in Christianity, it's not like really people are afraid. Okay, it's accepted.
Okay.
That you do go to hell, and the concepts of boiling water,
Sort of a purgatory.
yeah, I mean all that stuff exists. So the punishments exist, but the depth and the length, duration changes.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. That's fascinating from the Hindu perspective. That's good. Sergio.
It's probably a dumb question you'll hear tonight, but can you talk a little, if you know, about how the fictional devil morphed from being a black character
To red. I'll do a blog post on that. I'll do a blog post on that.
Okay.
Look it up. I don't know where there anything. Yeah.
Tweet it.
I know, you have costume concerns. Because you like to be accurate. Next.
Well, I guess more specifically tying into that question, what does the Bible have to say specifically about Satan's physical appearance?
The only stuff we have there is with Revelation, and that tends to be highly. We can break out Revelation if you want. I should have known we were going to fixate on his appearance. I should have been. It was a brief history of hell, not a brief history of Satan. I said we mentioned Satan in passing. Hang on. Final defeat of Satan. There's no description of him here. Was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet were, and they're tormented day and night forever and ever. Devil and Satan bound for 1,000 years and thrown into the pit. There's a description of the beast, but the beast isn't Satan. The description of the whore of Babylon, the great whore and the great beast, but neither of them are Satan. So actually, I'm sorry, Vic, I have to go back and, because I am not recalling a precise description of Satan's. I remember all these other creatures, the dragon, the beast, the whore of Babylon, that do have some descriptions about them. I'm not recalling a physical description of Satan. Now, it might have come from, but the beast isn't Satan.
Yeah, that's pretty much my recollection.
Yeah.
Too. Yeah, that's.
And then Revelation is by far the most descriptive when it comes to hell and demons, because even though Matthew talks a lot about hell, he doesn't say much.
Well, now, I do seem to recall there is somewhere in the Bible that refers to Satan as being kind of just an amorphous, formless.
Paul says, I believe it's 1 Corinthians 11 or 2 Corinthians 11, that he comes disguised as an angel of light. Beware of Satan because he is like this. And I think it might be that passage where he hints at that he can like adopt come under different guises. If you remember, anyone see The Last Temptation of Christ?
Yes.
I love that movie. It's been years since I've seen the movie. I remember actually walking through a picket line of fundamentalists to go into the cinema to watch that movie. But if you remember in that movie, okay, the fundamentalists got upset because the movie showed Jesus thinking about having sex. Not actually, well, in the movie he was. It was like, but having sex with Mary Magdalene. And what he was imagining, like leaving off his messianic calling and profession and walking away from it all and just living a normal life with like children and all that. Well then, the Christian just went, this is blasphemy! And it was like the most horrible thing ever done that they had this movie that showed Jesus thinking about having sex. And if you remember in that movie, there's this, and the whole premise of the movie is that he's up on the cross and he could theoretically take himself down from the cross at any time, but he stays up there to the end to fulfill his mission. But the way it's working in his mind as he's going through this kind of mental torment and thinking about other paths he could have taken is that this beautiful little girl is leading him by the hand, kind of showing him these alternative paths he could have taken. And at the end of the movie, the little girl morphs. Do you remember more vividly than I do, Andrew? But she became the devil.
Yeah.
Yes, the little girl was the devil. So that's like that passage in Paul where it says, beware, the devil comes disguised as an angel of light. And so that's, it was never, I think, there was this notion, that to a certain extent in the Bible, that if the devil did come at you, he certainly wouldn't come in full Sergio gear. It'd be a little more subtle. Yeah. It is great though. Yeah. Lewis.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of books. The Catholic Bible has more books than the Protestant Bible, and then there's a whole bunch of other Gospels or books, or whatever you want to call them, that didn't make it into the.
Yes. Actually, I covered that in one of these seminars, and I'll do it again sometime because. But it's a huge topic. 42 Old Testament books in the Catholic version, 39 in the Protestant version.
But is there in these other books? Is it I haven't got into any of them. My studies are limited, less than yours. Any of these other books that didn't make it have any descriptions of hell or the devil?
Yes.
The Book of Enoch.
I was going to say Enoch. Yes. Enoch for sure. And there are these hints, I referenced Maccabees earlier, and there's definitely hints to after death, retribution, and reward in the book of Maccabees. So that's from the intertestamental period, 120-ish BCE. Yeah, Andrew.
You touched on this briefly, but I think we can't emphasize too much how Christianity grossly distorted and exaggerated passages and aspects of the Hebrew religion or Judaism that were completely taken out of context, Gehenna being one of them.
Oh, exactly. Utterly.
Gehenna is mentioned like twice.
Yeah.
And it's describing historically a place where they thought the Canaanites sacrificed
child
children.
sacrifice, yeah.
Yeah, so it's mentioned twice in 1,000 pages. And out of that, we have this giant industry for the last 2,000 years.
And you see, don't you see the progression in the New Testament itself, a progression towards anti-Semitism as the early Christian movement is becoming more defined and, you get into the Gospel of John, the latest Gospel, and everywhere you turn, well, it's the Jews did this, and the Jews did that, which tells you, well, the people writing this ain't Jews. And so it becomes, the anti-Semitism becomes more pronounced chronologically throughout the New Testament. We have another question over here. I'll get back to you, Liz, since you had a couple. Yeah, sir, good.
Actually, I had a question for Lila.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, Lila.
Lila,
We're going to ask you about...
Okay, yeah, you told me that you put me on the spot already.
tell us about Muslim hell.
It's almost the same thing as Christian hell, except for the purgatory stage. There's a certain amount of time you have that you can make it up. Like, and you make it up after you're dead. You're in purgatory. And like, let's say you miss like 6 prayers in your life, you have to like do 20 prayers. But if you don't finish those 20 prayers before some horn blows, you're gonna be in hell forever. That's mean. It's eternal until.
Better pray fast.
Yeah, you have. Yeah, pretty much. It's the same thing.
It's a time event.
One minute, theology.
Oh, yes, Michael.
Why were people being put, like, say, from God's perspective, why was he letting people go to hell when he could have saved them, and, like, from the beginning before hell was depicted? He just kind of brought everyone there. Why all of a sudden is he letting them?
The problem with your question is it's too rational.
Can you repeat the question?
You said it very well. Can you say it just a little bit louder because it was beautiful? It was beautiful.
So if God was just taking everyone up before hell was sort of depicted from Satan, why all of a sudden, once Satan has his own sort of area where the damned go, why is he just now letting people down there to suffer when he could be saving them regardless?
Yeah, like why the whole need for salvation? Why didn't you just say, I'm letting you in? Why do I have to put you through all this stuff and make you believe these crazy things and create all this torment and torture? Yeah, well, I think hell actually, remember how I said that Paul really, I was kind of serious about Paul maybe trying to play the positive message card a little bit in the early days. And I think hell was not, as Christianity was just starting to get going, it wasn't a great motivational doctrine for recruitment. But then once you started to have an organization and you wanted to keep, and the organization was growing, and you wanted to maybe establish standards within that organization and keep, kind of like in a cult-like fashion, how do you motivate the troops and keep them in line?
Yes.
Hell becomes handier then. So I think it was, I think everything that any of us, anything about life, I mean, evolution is everywhere. Evolution is in religion. And I think doctrines evolve because I think purgatory worked magnificently. I think hell and purgatory were magnificent for the Middle Ages because there's death and dying all around. This is why hell flourishes in the time of enormous plagues. I mean, I love, we've all seen that scene in the Holy Grail. Bring out your dead, Yeah, it was like that, pretty much. Okay. So I think it practically worked. And then there is this aspect of human nature that is fascinated. That's the other thing we have to think about hell. I think we cannot discount there's an aspect of our psyche that is fascinated with darkness. And it's like Halloween and horror films and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Helter Skelter and everything. I mean, there is a part of our psyche that is fascinated with gore and everything else. And there was no multimedia back then. That was your entertainment. And they had, clearly with the medieval morality plays, they had a good time. Okay, I think we had Lewis and then Shamiko and then
If you look at this whole thing from an anthropological point of view, of heaven and hell, the use of heaven and hell and the promise of a better life after or less if you don't behave and so forth, is a way for those people who are your priests or preachers or whatever label you want to hang on them, shaman or so forth, was a method of perpetuating their position.
Oh, absolutely.
And the position of those that in their group.
Yeah.
A way to keep their job.
Well, okay, one passage that comes to mind from the New Testament is a story in the book of Acts, which is purportedly an account of life in the early days of the Christian church. It's written 20-some years after the time of Paul. So it's a story of this growing young, religious organization. And at a time when people were expected to they had this early on, this kind of cooperative attempt to live kind of communally and have a pooling of resources. And there was a couple, Ananias and Sapphira, who at the time of the offering withheld the fact that they had the proceeds from a plot of land that they owned that they were not giving to the church. And they had kind of lied about not giving, like, yeah, we've given you everything we've got, but we really have this plot of land over here. And so when they are brought forward to the elders of the church to give an accounting, oh, this is it's even better than that. They come forth one by one. I think the husband comes first, and then he drops dead, and then the wife comes in after the husband, and she drops dead. That gets into this. Well, what's the message? If you don't give your money to the organization, you're going to drop dead suddenly, or something bad could happen to you. It's a control thing.
Couldn't it be a justice thing? If you do bad things, you're going to pay for them.
Oh.
And they didn't see justice.
Right.
And so in their mind, they thought that I want to live a good life. And that person who doesn't, who steals, they're going to burn forever. So that this whole 2,000 years could just be, since religion and government were all pretty much the same or so wrapped together, there was always this find that sense of justice. You'll pay for your sins.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's wrong, and society deserves that justice.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well said. That's part of it.
I.e. what goes around comes around.
Did you have a question? Should you go
Thank you, Louis. Noah's Ark. So when God flooded the earth, is it assumed that all of those people, the sinners, when He washed away all the sinners, went to hell?
Oh, great question. This question has tormented Christian theologians since the beginning, from the beginning of Christianity. They puzzled over this stuff. Okay, a lot of possible solutions here, so you'll be able to rest easy tonight. Okay. Well, what is one solution for pre-Jesus people who died that maybe?
Retroactive, isn't it?
Pardon?
It's retroactive.
Okay, the retroactive answer was one answer. This gets, well, okay, a very popular answer. Ooh, let me see if it's in here. I'm going to see if the Catholics still have this one. No, we're out of luck. They did away with it. Limbo. Limbo was kind of a hold. It wasn't as bad as hell. Wasn't as great as heaven, but it wasn't bad. And limbo was where kind of okay, like Aristotle, Plato, people who lived before Jesus went. So they invented a place, although limbo actually came out of, the concept was a Roman concept, but kind of a halfway house. And then the retroactive answer, remember earlier we said in the creed, he crucified, died, and was buried, he descended into hell, and the third day he rose again. What did Jesus do in between dying on the cross on Good Friday and rising on Easter Sunday? Never mind the fact it's not really 3 days, but anyway, what, I'm sorry.
I'm Catholic and I'm enjoying this way too much. Can I sit down and listen to you? Because I had a great bunch of Catholic jokes.
And so the concept, the harrowing of hell, and I meant it was concept as he went, and this is based again on like two very vague scripture passages that Jesus, in between dying at 3 o'clock on Good Friday and rising sometime around dawn on Easter Sunday, that he was down visiting the spirits, souls, bodies of everybody who had died before he came, making his salvation possible. That's called the harrowing of hell. And of course, that harkens back to numerous other kind of divine figures in the ancient Near Eastern hell literature who made journeys to hell. Odysseus makes a journey to hell in the Odyssey. So.
Well, you also have the Mormon concept of retroactive salvation.
Oh,
which
that's a different
to
deal.
address
I
the
wish
same.
some are Mormon for any Mormons here tonight. Ex-Mormons, I should say. Or no. But there is, the Mormons, and there again, that's really just based on a passage from 1 Corinthians, and no other Christian group ever really latched onto. But Paul apparently references the fact that somehow in Corinth they're baptizing the dead, and because he doesn't criticize the people in Corinth for doing that, they assume anyway. So Joseph Smith developed the ceremony. Okay, with it, and I feel okay speaking about this, even though I'm not a former Mormon. I've known quite a few, and I've done some reading on the topic. There's a huge Mormon temple up near where I live at Cypress Wood and Champions Forest. That is, well, you know where that is, Jimmy. It's in our neighborhood. That's the one for this entire region. Now that Mormon temple, you should drive by it sometime if you're up on the northwest side, is different. Don't go in; they're not going to let you in. But it's different than your local Mormon kind of meeting house Sunday meeting thing. The temple exists for pretty much two ceremonies. I mean, there might be some other ceremonies I'm aware of. What are those two ceremonies? Weddings, sealing your marriages for eternity in a temple ceremony, and then baptism of the dead. And of the dead. That's why Mormons are big into genealogy. That's why everybody I know who is into genealogy at some point has to make a trip to Salt Lake City, which really freaks me out. Because they're keeping tabs on everybody. Why would all my friends who do genealogy work on their families, who do not have a single Mormon ancestor, have to go to Salt Lake City to do research? It's bizarre.
You know where Ancestry.com is located?
Oh, no, don't tell me.
Provo, Utah.
You're kidding. I could have gone all week without knowing that.
All right.
Yeah, David.
Back to the limbo thing. Now, did the Vatican do a flip-flop on that? That's really riled up a lot of people. They used to
Has it?
Yes. They said all the children used to go in limbo that died before they were
Right.
baptized.
Right.
No, we were wrong about that. I heard Hitchens say something.
Yeah, it was like,
Limbo's going, well, no, I just looked at it in here. This is the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and it's not in here.
yeah, about 5 years ago they said unbaptized babies don't go to limbo, they actually go to heaven.
They go to heaven. Right, yeah, I think they got rid of it. Oh, they changed their mind.
That
just came in. It's yeah.
New information.
Newsflash. Breaking news. So anyway, I'm trying to think because I thought there was enough. I was still answering your question about Noah, but I think those are pretty much the two options. But it is actually a question that people really seriously wrestled with. Even up into modern times. Because Vic was asking about how modern theologians have tried to kind of ameliorate the doctrine of hell to make it more palatable, or even like kind of use metaphors to explain it away. Karl Rahner was, and some of these guys are really smart guys. Don't get me wrong. I mean, these are people who know their ancient shit. They know ancient languages. I mean, but they're still in the kind of in that worldview. But Karl Rahner was a great Catholic theologian of the 70s and 80s, and he famously came up with a term called the anonymous Christian, because he was really bothered by the whole concept of hell, and so he tried to explain ways that people could be like, really Christian but not explicit Christians. If you were kind of in line with the values of Jesus, you could be like an anonymous Christian and God would let you in, kind of thing. Theologians have spent a lot of time worrying about this stuff, which is kind of crazy. We probably ought to. Did you have another question, Michael? No.
Yes. Does God have the power to venture to hell, or is he? That's the other crazy thing, is that God's final victory over Satan and the forces of evil is described in the book of Revelation sometime after the point of Jesus' second coming, depending upon how you interpret it, because there are Christians that believe
millennium is going to happen after the rapture or before the rapture. I mean, you got amillennials, premillennials, postmillennials. Never mind, the basic idea is at some point after the second coming, God's going to wipe out evil and suffer, which begs the question, why didn't he have much impact at the first coming? You know what I mean? It's like, could he have done it? And so theoretically, I mean, in the Christian viewpoint, God can do anything because God is omnipotent, all-powerful. But there are limits that God puts on himself because it's the proper thing to do, you know?
Okay, and then, so during the 3 days that Jesus was down in hell, what stopped the devil from doing anything to him? Because God was not supposed to be down there anyway.
Because he had a magic protective coat on. The devil's, his visibility cloak. Yeah, exactly. I'll tell you how, this is a story I told over a year ago when I spoke at the HOH thing. Some of you may have been there, but it's worth retelling because it's something that's kind of, you know how you have these like experiences as a kid that you never forget? And when I was in elementary school, we had a vocal music, we had to go to a vocal music class, and we had a teacher, she looked like one of the Far Side characters. She had like really big hair and like these kind of scary dark leather boot type shoes on and the crazy glasses, and she was like right out of the Far Side. And I remember standing on the risers in vocal music class, and she was telling us a story about, we're singing a song apparently about Noah and the flood. This is what you made me think of this with the flood thing. And, which is public elementary school, okay, public in Baltimore, and this is not private school. And so she was telling us, the boys and girls, this is what this song is about, and she told the story of Noah and the ark and how, and then when the flood was over, and she sang this in a really sweet voice, he put a rainbow in the sky as a sign that he will never again destroy the world in this way, and she was talking about how beautiful this was, and we're like, okay, and that's what the rainbow is about. And then she looked at us and she got real serious, and she goes, and you know why he said he would never destroy the world again with water? And we're like, why? Because the next time he comes, he's going to do it with fire! Like this! She was serious! Okay. And so you're silver. Yes! That was like second grade, I think. And so, it's still, that was going to be my closing illustration. But there's part of me that wonders, gang, as optimistic as I am about the advance of free thought and rationality and all that, I sometimes wonder, given the polarization of our culture, the kind of not so latent racism that's been bubbling to the surface again because we have an African American president that's kind of revealing all kinds of ugliness that, it's always been there, but it's become more visible. There's part of it, and then, lots of kind of like the extremist stuff that's happening. I kind of sometimes wonder if there's a segment of the world that's always right for an apocalyptic message. There's a segment of the world that's always right for this kind of fascination with divine vengeance and retribution. And as hopeful as I am that we're making progress, I think we have to kind of like stay the course and be vigilant and spread the good word, because I think it's still there, I think it's still lurking. And as much as I wish hell were a relic of the medieval past, I think it's still with us. So I will be happy to do kind of one-on-one questions. I think we ought to some of you guys got to go. I'll be happy to. Thank you for being here. I had a good time. Hope you enjoyed.